concerned with the expression of language, sort of like a motor function, is in front of the motor area. My area, Wernicke's area, concerned with the understanding of language, is in the back of the brain where a lot of sensory information comes in. This really means that mental functions represented in the brain can't be represented by a single area. Complex mental functions, he said, need to be localized not in a single region, but in several regions interconnected with one another. So Gall was not only wrong about the fact that he had a crazy way of localizing function, but he was wrong about thinking that highly complex mental functions could be restricted to a single area. They involved more than that. And he said to himself, look, isn't it interesting how these two areas, Broca's area and my area, are arranged in the brain? Broca's area, front of the brain, near the motor strip. My area, Wernicke's area, in the back of the brain, where sensory information comes in. In fact, you can see that the auditory cortex, which carries information from spoken language, is near Wernicke's area. The visual cortex, the back of the brain, occipital lobe, information about language that you read is in the back of the brain. Moreover, he knew that the auditory cortex and the visual cortex hook on to Wernicke's area. And Wernicke's area has a direct pathway called the arcuate fasciculus to Broca's area. And look, Broca's area is right near that part of the motor strip that is concerned with vocalization, with the actual motor apparatus for speech. And he put this information together in an extraordinarily prescient theory of language, which, although it was formulated, in 1870, still explains 85% of the clinical phenomena one sees now in an emergency room in cases of aphasia. He said it works like this. If you hear spoken language or you read a text, that information is encoded neurally and passed on to Wernicke's area, where the understanding of language occurs. The information is then passed on through the arcuate fasciculus to Broca's area, where the grammar for language is located, and that hooks up to the area that is involved in vocalization of language and is connected to that. From this extraordinary model, which holds to this day, he was not only to give us an idea of how language is generated, but he made a prediction about the fact that one would someday discover a new kind of aphasia, which does not involve direct damage to either Wernicke's area or Broca's area. Can any of you guess what kind of a lesion, what kind of a disruption could give you a language deficit without interfering with Wernicke's or Broca's area? Yes?
A lesion in the arcuate
in the fasciculus that connects the two areas. Brilliant. You have a future as a neurologist without any question. A lesion that interrupts the pathway between Wernicke's area and Broca's area. What is now called in modern language a conduction aphasia. There you understand language and you express it, but the connection between it can be quite vague. It's like a presidential press conference. Information comes in, information comes out, but there's no connection between the two. Here is a patient with conduction aphasia.
And when we were getting ready to start this videotape, the producer asked us to count to 10. Remember that?
Yes.
Can you do that again?
Why? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Boing to Gabby people. Go. I can't.
No,
go.
that's really hard. Let me get you started.
I was stunned.
Okay. 1,
2, 4, 5, 6. Better send. Point.
Good enough.
Is that all right?
That's fine.
What is so interesting about this lady is she clearly is very intelligent, and she clearly understands the instructions, and she clearly can express herself in a very good way. But you could see how after a while she completely disconnects what she wants to do, what she's heard she should do, and what she actually does. What also came out of this is that we now understand from Wernicke and Broca's work how important the left hemisphere is for language. Because every natural language that you acquire, you learn a foreign language, that will be represented in Wernicke and Broca's area. The grammar for any natural language, not for artificial language, any natural language will be represented in Broca's area, number one. Number two, even if the language is not a spoken language, that is a sign language, is represented on the left side in Wernicke's area and Broca's area. So if you have a defect in Broca's area and you sign, let's assume you're a deaf person, you will not be able to sign. You will be able to understand other people signing because your Wernicke area is intact, but you will not be able to sign yourself because the Broca area on the left side handles all languages, including sign language. What about the right area? The right area is not involved in the logic of language. It's concerned with the intonation of language. Now, when we speak to one another, we communicate affect, emotion. I, in speaking to you, must convey to you that this is a great privilege for me. I immensely enjoy having the opportunity of interacting with you, and I hope you are listening to the intonation of my speech that attempts to convey that. So there is both the perceptive part and your part, which involves Wernicke's area, and the Broca's area and my part on the right side of the brain, not on the left side. So this raises the question, we've localized language, we've localized the motor strip, we know something about the right hemisphere. Are all mental functions, can they be localized in the brain? Can we localize specific areas for faces? Are there specific areas that are involved in our personality that make you who you are? Are there areas in the brain that are involved in social interactions that might be defective in autism? I think the answer is we're beginning to identify areas involved in all of these. I'm going to give you one example, but we can discuss the other examples later on. In the early stages, until around 1950, almost everything we learned about the human brain and about mental function came from studies of patients with one or another disorder and from studies of experimental animals. But a major revolution occurred about 20 years ago that made it possible to study people like you and me, intact, behaving subjects, awake, responding to certain tasks, looking at objects, examining objects, and this was through imaging experiments. For example, with functional magnetic resonance imaging, a normal person, this is absolutely painless, can lie in a scanner, and when they do a particular task, that area becomes active, it fires action potentials, it becomes more active. That requires more energy, there's an increased blood flow, there's an increased oxygen, and that signal is taken by the scanner and is able to indicate what area of the brain becomes active when there's an increased oxygen demand in that region that is being recruited.